64% of transgender people record incomes of less than $25,000. How 41% of LGBT employees have reported verbal and or physical abuse in the workplace, and 14% of all hate crimes reported in the U.S. are committed against the LGBT demographic. Considering that there are hundreds of demographics in the United States, the fact that 14% or to just one is a shocking statistic. Not to mention that LGBT individuals struggle on more than just the work front, more than on the financial front, and even on the next slide, you're going to see that they struggle in their home life. LGBT individuals aren't viewed highly in this society. 1 in 4 Americans believe that equal protection rights shouldn't be extended to the LGBT community. According to the CDC, report that 18% of LGBT students have been forced into sexual intercourse at some point in their life. The fact that on every single front, LGBT students and adults, kids and adults, are going through these issues just for their identity is a very disheartening outlook on our society as a whole today. Here's another graphic for you. 85% of students were verbally harassed in the past year in the LGBT community. Kids who identify as one thing or the other are being treated differently because they want to identify with how they feel. That is horrendous. 65% of those students heard homophobic remarks very frequently. 65%, that is a very high percentage of the 10 to 15% of LGBT students there are in the country today. Bills across the country targeting LGBT individuals. These bills range from preventing transgender athletes from competing in sports to, Senate Bill 289 in Arkansas allows doctors to turn away LGBT patients on the terms of their identity. These assaults on the LGBT community have not only affected their livelihoods, but can also be deadly. The fact that doctors in Arkansas can actively discriminate and it be totally legal due to a bill passed just this year is a very shocking and very, very grim outlook on what's to come. And here I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the anti-LGBT legislation out there today. We just talked about Senate Bill 289. In Alabama, Senate Bill 184 prevents gender-affirming medical care to all people under the age of 19. At 18, you are a legal adult and can fight for your country, but in Alabama, you cannot have gender-affirming surgery for another year. Arizona House Bill 2293 prevents schools from requiring teachers to respect LGBT in pronouns. This is not a good precedent where teachers are allowed to not identify the students with the identity that they choose after a certain age, or even at any age. I mean, changing someone's pronouns isn't that huge of a deal, yet they're passing legislation that allows teachers to just bypass a very important part of someone's livelihood, which is not a good precedent for 10% of the population who we are trying to foster into productive members of society. And then following, South Carolina has a House Bill 455 that allows parents the right to opt their children out of all sexual education courses that detail age or gender identity. This is dangerous because at school where you are supposed to learn, we are supposed to learn about relevant topics in society. The AIDS epidemic was huge in the 80s and 90s and is still a problem today. That should be something that teachers should have in their lessons plans, as well as gender identity. 10% of the population, 10% of 565 million people are LGBT. That is a very large percent of this country. And the fact that in South Carolina, parents can just say, hey, you can just not learn about this portion of the country. That's just not fair to those within the LGBT community. On the next slide, we're going to watch a video.
This morning, the so-called happiest place on earth plunging into the middle of a culture war. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis targeting Disney, the state's largest single-site employer.
and they are treated on a pedestal. This one corporation is treated differently than everybody else. Now in the legislature, you see a movement to reevaluate those special privileges.
The governor angry at Disney's opposition to the state's controversial new parental rights and education legislation, also known as the Don't Say Gay law. It bans classroom discussion on sexual orientation and gender identity from kindergarten through third grade. In a statement, Disney says, "Our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed in the legislature or struck down in the courts." It's all amid the backdrop of cultural and political battles over the law and issues of representation, which conservatives hope to make a central issue of the coming midterm election. DeSantis fundraising off the fight. Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz tweeting, "I'll tell you how to trap this rodent," and commentators taking aim.
Why not just rename the roller coaster, Sex Mountain?
DeSantis is suggesting a repeal of Disney's special status established by a 1967 law. It created a unique self-governing district around the 43 square miles encompassing Disney World, an area twice the size of Manhattan. As a result, Disney effectively has its own security force and building, zoning, and fire departments. This dispute comes after protests and a walkout by some Disney cast members when the company did little to oppose a bill before it was signed. Disney's CEO apologizing to employees.
All right, on the why that slide was important. That video details the Don't Say Gay law, which has been much controversy in the country lately. There is education out there for children from kindergarten to third grade on the topic of gender identity. And it's very important to integrate that education into society because more educated people produce more functional members in society. Now, the question of who needs to know this, as much as this should be a giant public display that's plastered on every wall and billboard, the most important demographic that this needs to reach to is college-aged individuals, people who are old enough to vote, who are educated on LGBT issues and willing to stand up for equal rights are the ones that have the most power to better these statistics as well as influencing social change. 66% of all college students turned out to vote in 2020, which was the largest uptick among all demographics from the 2016 election to the 2020 election. In 2016, only 52% of college-age students voted. In 2020, that jumped up 14%. College education is not regulated by the government. It's not regulated by a state. So in college, you can educate yourself on a variety of needed topics in society. And I feel like college-aged people are A, old enough to vote when this knowledge is brought to them, and B, this is where the further education comes in. The more educated our society is, the more we can fight these issues instead of just passively letting them go. Right now, it's awesome that we have light on these bills that are coming through, and people are upset and they're protesting, and that is a very important part of influencing social change. And that's why I think college-age people should know this. This is designed to, kind of light a fire underneath college-age people. And this brings up to my final slide. How do you solve the LGBT issue? It is imperative to bring light to all of the injustice given to the LGBT community through educating those to be active in their communities when these are brought into focus. As I just talked about, college education is considered private education and it's uninhibited by government regulation. And educating people old enough to vote and passionate enough to fight for change is how this issue will resolve itself. Because the more people who know about it and who are passionate about it means the more people showing up to the voting booth to vote down these legislations, to change these legislations. And even further down the road, these same college-aged individuals are going to grow up, and some of them are going to run for office, and some of these people are going to make the changes that are needed. And we need it as a community. We need to support our LGBT individuals in our community, and we need to be better at giving them the rights that they deserve because they are humans in this country. And on that note, over the past 4 to 10 years, we've seen a lot more of these injustices come to light, and bring them to light is the first step. And thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope you were able to take something out of it.